The wrench slipped from Maya's oil-stained fingers as Lieutenant Commander Hayes walked past her workstation for the third time that morning. Each time, his eyes swept over her like she was part of the machinery itself, invisible and unremarkable. She wiped her hands on her coveralls and returned to the engine block of the Humvee, its intricate components spread across her workbench in perfect order. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez leaned against the garage door frame, watching her work. "You know, Chun, I still can't figure out why they stationed someone like you here," he said, his voice carrying that familiar tone of casual dismissal. "This is Coronado Naval Base, not some community college auto shop." Maya didn't look up from the carburetor she was rebuilding. "Someone like me," she repeated quietly, her fingers never pausing in their precise movements. Rodriguez shifted his weight. "You know what I mean. This place is for warriors, operators. The real deal." He gestured toward the distant sound of gunfire from the training ranges. "Those SEALs out there, they're risking everything. And here you are, playing with car parts." The comment drew chuckles from two Marines who had stopped to watch. Corporal Stevens crossed his arms over his chest. "Come on, Rodriguez, someone's out to fix the trucks when the real soldiers break them," he said with a smirk. Maya's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but her hands remained steady. The carburetor clicked back together with mechanical precision. "I'm just saying," Rodriguez continued, warming to his audience, "when the action starts, some of us are running toward the sound of guns, and others are hiding under the hood of a vehicle. Nothing wrong with knowing your place." The Marines nodded their agreement. Stevens examined his fingernails with exaggerated interest. "My sister works at a garage back home in Ohio," he said. "She'd probably fit right in here, too. Same skill set." From across the motor pool, Chief Petty Officer Davis approached carrying a clipboard thick with maintenance requests. He glanced at Maya's workspace, then at the gathering crowd. "Chun," he called out, "I need that Humvee operational by 1400 hours. Can you handle that? Or do I need to call in someone with actual certification?" Maya finally looked up, meeting his gaze directly. "It'll be ready by 1330, Chief." Davis raised an eyebrow. "That's cutting it close. These vehicles need to be perfect when they roll out. Lives depend on them." He paused, studying her face for any sign of uncertainty. "Are you absolutely certain you could deliver what you're promising?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Rodriguez and Stevens exchanged glances, clearly expecting her to back down or ask for help. "Absolutely certain," Maya replied, her voice level and calm. Davis made a note on his clipboard. "Well, we'll see about that." He turned to address the small group that had gathered. "The rest of you have duties to attend to. This isn't entertainment." As the men dispersed, their conversations carried fragments of doubt. Rodriguez muttered something about rookie mechanics, and Stevens chuckled about garage girls trying to play with military equipment. Maya returned to her work, but the familiar weight of dismissal settled on her shoulders like dust from the California desert. She'd been at Coronado for 6 months now, and the pattern never changed. To them, she was invisible until something broke, then suddenly she was the weak link they had to worry about. Speaking of worry, I'm curious about something, and I'd love to hear from those of you watching from military towns or areas with big bases. Do you see this kind of dismissal often, where people get written off before they even get a chance to prove themselves? Drop a comment and let me know what state or region you're watching from, because this story hits different when you've seen it firsthand. The afternoon sun slanted through the garage windows as Maya torqued the final bolt on the Humvee's engine. Around her, the motor pool hummed with activity, but she worked in relative solitude, exactly the way she preferred it. At 1325, she turned the ignition key. The engine roared to life with a smooth, powerful rumble that spoke of perfect timing and flawless mechanical harmony. Chief Davis appeared at her shoulder as if summoned by the sound. He walked around the vehicle once, checking her work with the thoroughness of a man whose reputation depended on details. "Well," he said finally, "I'll admit it runs like new. Maybe better than new." Maya wiped her hands on a clean rag. "It should give them exactly what they need, Chief." Davis nodded slowly, but his expression remained guarded, as if waiting for the other shoe to drop. Time would tell whether her confidence was justified or just another case of rookie overreach. In the distance, the sound of helicopter rotors grew louder, carrying with it the promise of missions that people like Rodriguez and Stevens would be part of, while she remained behind to keep their equipment running. That was her role here, and everyone seemed determined to make sure she never forgot it. The next morning brought a convoy of vehicles that had returned from a training exercise in the desert, each one caked with sand and showing signs of hard use. Maya arrived at the motor pool before dawn, her toolbox organized with the same precision that had earned her a perfect score on every mechanical aptitude test she'd ever taken. Lieutenant Commander Hayes stood near the damaged vehicles, speaking in low tones with Master Chief Peterson. Maya caught fragments of their conversation as she began her inspection routine. "The transmission on the lead vehicle is completely shot," Hayes said, shaking his head. "We pushed them hard out there, maybe too hard." Peterson crossed his arms. "How long until we can get them operational again?" "We got another exercise scheduled for next week." Hayes glanced toward Maya, who was already underneath the first Humvee with a work light. "That depends on our mechanic there. These aren't simple oil changes we're talking about." Maya slid out from under the vehicle, her assessment complete. "The transmission needs a complete rebuild, but the differential is salvageable," she called out. "I can have it ready in 2 days if I get the parts by noon." Peterson walked over, his boots crunching on the gravel. 2 days seems optimistic for that kind of work, Chun. You sure you're not biting off more than you can chew? Maya stood and wiped her hands. "I've rebuilt transmissions before, Master Chief. This one's actually in better shape than some I've worked on." Hayes joined them, studying the vehicle with skeptical eyes. "The last mechanic we had here was a 20-year veteran. Took him 3 days minimum for transmission work. You've been here 6 months. The implication hung in the air between them. Maya nodded toward her toolbox. "Different approaches, I guess. I've got some techniques that might speed things up." Peterson and Hayes exchanged glances. "Technique," Peterson repeated slowly. "Where exactly did you pick up these techniques, Chun?" "Your file shows standard automotive training, nothing specialized." Maya felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the careful balance between truth and the cover story she was required to maintain. "I had some good instructors," she said simply. "They taught me to work efficiently." Across the motor pool, Sergeant Martinez was briefing a group of junior enlisted personnel on vehicle maintenance procedures. His voice carried clearly in the morning air as he gestured toward Maya's workspace. "The key thing to remember," Martinez said to his audience, "is that mechanical work in a military environment requires absolute precision. One mistake, one shortcut, and people die. That's why we have standards and protocols. That's why experience matters more than enthusiasm." One of the younger Marines raised his hand. "What about Chin over there? She seems to know what she's doing." Martinez glanced toward Maya, then back to his group. "Chin's new," he said with careful diplomacy. "Enthusiasm is great, but there's no substitute for proven experience under pressure. When your life depends on that engine starting, you want someone who's been tested in real situations." Maya continued her work, aware of the eyes on her, but refusing to let the scrutiny affect her focus. She moved with economical precision, each motion deliberate and confident. Her hands found problems that others might miss, diagnosed issues with an accuracy that came from understanding machines at a fundamental level. Chief Davis approached carrying a steaming cup of coffee. "You're moving pretty fast through that inspection," he observed. "Most mechanics take twice as long to do a proper assessment." Maya looked up from the engine compartment where she was examining the fuel system. "Fast doesn't mean sloppy, Chief. I know what to look for." Davis sipped his coffee thoughtfully. "What exactly are you looking for that others might miss?" Maya pointed to a nearly invisible crack in a fuel line. "This, for instance, hairline fracture that would cause a pressure drop under load. Could strand a vehicle in hostile territory." Davis leaned in for a closer look, squinting at the barely visible damage. "I'll be damned. How'd you spot that so quickly?" "Experience," Maya replied, the word carrying more weight than anyone around her could possibly understand. As the morning progressed, Maya's efficient work style began to draw more attention. She completed diagnostics in half the expected time, and identified problems that the previous inspections had missed. Her movements were precise and confident, displaying a level of mechanical intuition that seemed almost supernatural. Corporal Stevens appeared at her shoulder as she worked on the damaged transmission. "You know, Chun, I've been watching you work, and I've got to ask something." Maya didn't look up from a gear assembly she was examining. "What's that, Stevens? Where did you really learn to work like this?" Stevens gestured at her organized workspace and systematic approach. "This isn't community college stuff. This is graduate-level mechanical knowledge." Maya felt the weight of the question, the careful line she had to walk. "I had good teachers," she said again. "Some people learn faster than others." Stevens nodded slowly, but his expression suggested he wasn't entirely satisfied with the answer. "Well, whoever taught you knew their business. I've never seen anyone work transmission gears like that." The comment was overheard by Martinez, who paused his instruction to look over at Maya's workspace. His expression was unreadable, but something in his posture suggested a shift in attention, a recognition that perhaps there was more to the quiet mechanic than anyone had initially assumed. Maya continued her work, aware that each task completed efficiently only raised more questions. Her cover required her to be competent but unremarkable, skilled but not suspiciously so. It was a balance that grew more difficult to maintain with each passing day, especially when every instinct told her to work at full capacity. The transmission rebuild would indeed take 2 days, just as she had promised. But completing it on schedule would only invite more scrutiny, more questions about techniques and training that she couldn't fully answer without compromising everything she was supposed to keep hidden. The transmission rebuild was completed in exactly 47 hours, and the test drive confirmed what Maya already knew. The vehicle ran smoother than it had since leaving the factory. Chief Davis signed off on the work order with visible reluctance, as if admitting success might somehow diminish his authority. By Thursday afternoon, the atmosphere on base had shifted from routine training operations to something more urgent. Maya noticed it first in the increased radio chatter, then in the way officers moved with purposeful haste across the compound. Something significant was developing. Lieutenant Commander Hayes gathered his senior staff in the briefing room adjacent to the motor pool. Through the thin walls, Maya could hear fragments of conversation that spoke of operational planning and deployment timelines. She continued working on routine maintenance, but her attention was divided between the spark plugs she was replacing and the tension building around her. Master Chief Peterson emerged from the briefing room and walked directly to her workspace. "Chun, we're going to need every vehicle in this motor pool operational within the next 12 hours. Can you make that happen?" Maya looked up from the engine she was tuning. "What's the current status of the fleet?" Peterson consulted his clipboard. "Sabantan vehículos total. 14 are fully operational, 2 need minor repairs, and 1 has been waiting for parts." "The parts truck arrived this morning," Maya said, gesturing toward a stack of boxes near her workbench. "I can have everything ready by 0600 tomorrow." Peterson studied her face as if searching for any sign of uncertainty. "This isn't routine maintenance, Chun. These vehicles need to perform flawlessly under extreme conditions. Are you confident in your assessment?" Maya met his gaze directly. "They'll perform, Master Chief." As Peterson walked away, Maya began organizing her approach to the remaining repairs. The work wasn't particularly challenging, but the timeline was aggressive. She would need to work through the night to meet the deadline. Around 1800 hours, the base's communications center began receiving encrypted transmissions that drew the attention of every senior officer on the compound. Maya watched from her position under the hood of a Humvee as groups of personnel gathered around radio equipment, their expressions growing increasingly serious. Sergeant Martinez approached her workspace, carrying a maintenance request form. "Chun, I need you to prioritize this vehicle," he said, pointing to a heavily armored transport that had just arrived from another base. "It's going to be part of tomorrow's operation." Maya examined the vehicle's maintenance log. "When did this arrive?" 2 hours ago, Martinez replied. "It's been running hard for the past month. Needs a complete inspection and any necessary repairs." Maya nodded and began gathering the tools she would need. The transport was larger and more complex than the standard Humvees, with additional armor plating and enhanced communication equipment. As she worked, she became aware of conversations happening around the vehicle that provided glimpses into the mission being planned. Captain Williams spoke quietly with two other officers near the transport's rear entrance. "The insertion point is approximately 40 kilometers from the coast," he said, his voice barely audible above the sound of Maya's tools. "Intelligence suggests minimal resistance, but we're preparing for all contingencies." One of the officers, a man Maya didn't recognize, consulted a tablet displaying what appeared to be satellite imagery. "The terrain is challenging, but our people are trained for this type of environment. The bigger concern is communication once they're in position." Williams nodded. "That's why the transport needs to be absolutely reliable. It's their primary link back to base until the operation is complete." Maya continued her inspection, noting several minor issues that needed attention. The brake system required adjustment, and one of the communication antennas showed signs of where that could affect signal strength. Nothing catastrophic, but details that could matter in a high-stress situation. As the evening progressed, the pace of activity around the base intensified. Personnel moved with the focused urgency that preceded major operations. Equipment was checked and rechecked, communications were tested, and vehicles were loaded with supplies and specialized gear. Maya worked steadily through the repairs, her movements efficient and precise. The transport systems were more complex than standard vehicles, but the underlying principles remained the same. She adjusted brake tolerances, replaced worn components, and verified that every system functioned within specifications. Near midnight, Chief Davis returned to check on her progress. "How's it looking, Chun?" Maya wiped her hands on a clean rag. "Everything's within normal parameters, Chief. The brake system needed adjustment, and I replaced a worn antenna connection, but she's solid." Davis climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. The transport rumbled to life with reassuring power. "Good work," he said after checking several systems. "This vehicle could be the difference between mission success and failure." Maya packed her tools as Davis completed his inspection. The weight of responsibility wasn't lost on her. Somewhere beyond the base perimeter, a mission was being planned that would depend on every piece of equipment functioning exactly as designed. The transport would carry personnel into whatever situation had generated so much urgent activity. Those people would trust their lives to the machinery she had just repaired, and that trust carried a gravity that transcended her official role as a mechanic. As she prepared to begin work on the remaining vehicles, Maya reflected on the careful balance she maintained between competence and invisibility. Tonight's work had been routine by her standards, but she understood that her definition of routine was shaped by experiences that her colleagues couldn't begin to imagine. The mission would launch at dawn, and every vehicle would need to perform flawlessly. Maya returned to her workbench, knowing that the next several hours would test not only her mechanical skills, but also her ability to ensure mission success while remaining just another mechanic doing her job. Dawn broke over Coronado with the sound of rotors spinning up on the helicopter pad. Maya finished the final pre-flight inspection on the last Humvee as SEAL Team 7 assembled near their deployment vehicles. The men moved with the quiet confidence of operators who had done this countless times before, checking gear and reviewing mission parameters one final time. Lieutenant Commander Hayes stood near the lead vehicle, speaking with the team leader, a weathered chief petty officer named Ramirez. The mission brief was classified, but Maya could see the tension in their posture as they discussed logistics and contingencies. "All vehicles show green across the board," Chief Davis reported to Hayes. "Should finish the maintenance cycle at 0530. Everything's been tested and verified." Hayes nodded, then looked toward Maya, who was securing her tools in preparation for the team's departure. "Good work, Chun. These men are counting on reliable transportation." Maya acknowledged the comment with a slight nod. "The vehicles will get them where they need to go, sir." Chief Ramirez approached the lead Humvee and performed his own brief inspection, running his hands along critical components and checking fluid levels. His movements spoke of someone who understood that mechanical failure in hostile territory could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophe. "You the mechanic who worked on these?" Ramirez asked Maya directly. "Yes, Chief," Maya replied. Ramirez studied her face for a moment. "First time prepping vehicles for my team. What's your background?" Maya felt the familiar weight of the question. "Standard automotive training, Chief. I've been working on military vehicles for about 2 years." Ramirez nodded slowly. 2 years. "Well, I hope your training was thorough. Where we're going, there's no roadside assistance." The comment drew quiet chuckles from several team members who were loading their gear. Petty Officer Martinez, a communications specialist, looked up from his equipment check. "Don't worry, Chief. If something breaks, we'll just call AAA." More laughter followed, but there was an edge to it that spoke of nervous energy before deployment. These men had trained extensively for whatever mission they were about to undertake, but they all understood that success often depended on factors beyond their control. Ramirez climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. The Humvee responded with smooth, powerful acceleration as he tested the systems Maya had verified hours earlier. "Transmission feels solid," he called out to his team. "She knows her business." The compliment was genuine, but Maya noticed the slight surprise in his voice, as if he hadn't expected competent work from someone so new to the base. She had grown accustomed to that tone, the reluctant acknowledgement that perhaps she wasn't as inexperienced as her file suggested. Master Chief Peterson appeared with a final briefing folder and handed it to Ramirez. "Weather's holding steady, and intelligence shows no change in the operational environment. You're cleared for immediate departure." Ramirez secured the folder and signaled his team. "Mount up. We've got a schedule to keep." The SEAL team moved with practiced efficiency, each man taking his assigned position in a convoy. Maya watched as they performed final equipment checks, their movements precise and economical. These were professionals at the peak of their abilities, about to undertake a mission that required everything to go exactly according to plan. As the convoy prepared to depart, Chief Davis approached Maya. "They'll be out of communication for approximately 72 hours, he said quietly. "Standard operating procedure for this type of mission." Maya nodded, understanding the implication. Once the team departed, their success would depend entirely on their training, their equipment, and the reliability of the vehicle she had prepared for them. The lead Humvee pulled away from the motor pool, followed by the remaining vehicles in precise formation. Maya watched until they disappeared beyond the base perimeter, carrying 12 highly trained operators toward whatever objective had generated so much urgent preparation. Chief Davis remained beside her as the sound of engines faded into the distance. "Now we wait," he said simply. Maya returned to her workspace, but the normal routine of maintenance and repair felt different now. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the vehicles she had serviced were carrying men into potentially hostile territory. The brake adjustments she had made, the fluid levels she had verified, the system she had tested, all of it could matter in ways that routine maintenance never did. The base settled into a different rhythm with the SEAL team deployed. Radio operators maintained regular communication schedules, intelligence personnel monitored satellite feeds, and support staff prepared for the team's eventual return. Maya continued her assigned duties, but she found herself listening more carefully to the fragments of conversation that drifted across the motor pool. By midday, the first scheduled communication check confirmed that the team had reached their initial waypoint without incident. The vehicles were performing as expected, and the mission was proceeding according to plan. Maya felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that her work had contributed to that success. Lieutenant Commander Hayes stopped by her workspace during his afternoon inspection rounds. "The team reported that all vehicles are running perfectly," he said. "Whatever you did during that maintenance cycle, it worked." Maya looked up from the engine she was rebuilding. "Just standard procedures, sir. Making sure everything functions the way it's supposed to." Hayes nodded, but his expression suggested he was beginning to recognize that Maya's definition of standard procedures might be more comprehensive than most. "Keep up the good work, Chun. When they get back, I want those vehicles ready for the next mission." Maya returned to her work, aware that the next 72 hours would test not only the SEAL team's abilities, but also the reliability of every component she had touched. In the complex machinery of military operations, the mechanic's role was often invisible until something went wrong. Maya preferred it that way, working in the shadows while others took the risks that mattered most. 36 hours into the mission, the first communication window came and went without contact. Chief Davis stood in the radio room, his expression growing more concerned with each minute of silence that passed. The backup communication time arrived 2 hours later with the same result. Nothing but static and empty frequencies. Maya was replacing brake pads on a transport vehicle when Lieutenant Commander Hayes emerged from the communications center, his face grim. He walked directly to Master Chief Peterson, speaking in low, urgent tones that carried across the motor pool despite their obvious attempt at discretion. "No contact for 6 hours," Hayes said quietly. "That's well outside normal parameters for a mission like this." Peterson crossed his arms. "Equipment failure?" Hayes shook his head. Multiple communication systems would have to fail simultaneously. The probability is extremely low, especially with the maintenance shun performed before deployment. Maya continued her work, but every word of their conversation registered clearly. The vehicle she had serviced carried redundant communication equipment, GPS tracking systems, and emergency beacons. For all of them to fail at once suggested something far more serious than mechanical problems. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez approached the two officers, carrying a folder thick with operational protocols. "Sir, what's the procedure if we can't re-establish contact by the next window?" Hayes consulted his watch. "Next scheduled check is in 4 hours. If we don't hear from them by then, we'll have to assume the worst and begin contingency planning." Rodriguez nodded grimly. "How long before we initiate search and rescue?" 12 hours minimum, Peterson replied. "That's assuming we can get authorization and assets in position. The operational area is challenging terrain, and we'll need specialized equipment to mount an effective search." Maya felt a cold weight settling in her stomach as the implications became clear. Chief Ramirez and his team weren't just missing communication. In hostile territory, radio silence usually meant one of two things. Either they were maintaining operational security by choice, or they were no longer able to communicate at all. The afternoon passed with increasing tension as each failed communication attempt confirmed that something had gone seriously wrong. Maya watched officers and senior enlisted personnel gather in small groups, their conversations growing more animated as options were discussed and contingencies planned. Captain Williams arrived from the main headquarters building carrying updated intelligence reports. He found Hayes near the radio equipment and spoke quietly but urgently. "Satellite imagery shows the convoy reached the target area, but we've lost track of their position. The last confirmed GPS ping was 18 hours ago." Hayes studied the satellite photos Williams had brought. "Any signs of engagement or hostile activity?" Williams pointed to several areas on the images. "These heat signatures could indicate recent combat, but the resolution isn't sufficient for definitive assessment. What we do know is that the vehicles aren't where they're supposed to be." Maya abandoned any pretense of focusing on her assigned work. The conversation had moved close enough to her workspace that she could hear every word, and the growing desperation in their voices was unmistakable. Peterson joined the group, consulting a tactical map. "If they're compromised, what are our options for extraction?" Williams traced potential routes on the map with his finger. "The terrain limits our approach options. Helicopter insertion would be fastest, but if hostile forces are present, we'd be flying into a potential ambush situation." Hayes nodded grimly. "And a ground approach would take too long. By the time we reach their last known position, any trail would be cold." Maya found herself studying the map over William's shoulder, noting the geographic challenges that would complicate any rescue attempt. The operational area was mountainous terrain with limited access routes, exactly the kind of environment where a small team could disappear without a trace. Rodriguez approached with additional intelligence updates. "Sir, we've been monitoring enemy communications in the region. There's been increased chatter over the past 12 hours, but nothing specific about captured personnel. The lack of definitive information was almost worse than confirmed bad news. Maya could see the frustration building among the senior staff as they faced the possibility that 12 highly trained operators had simply vanished in a hostile territory. Chief Davis found Maya near her workbench as the sun began to set. "Chun, I need you to prep every available vehicle for potential deployment. We might be mounting a search and rescue operation within the next few hours." Maya looked up from the diagnostic equipment she was organizing. "What's a mission profile, Chief?" Davis glanced around to ensure their conversation remained private. "Rough terrain, potentially hostile environment, long duration. I need vehicles that can handle extreme conditions without mechanical failure." Maya nodded. "How many vehicles and what timeline?" "6 vehicles minimum, ready to deploy by midnight," Davis replied. "Can you make that happen?" Maya was already mentally calculating the work required. She would need to perform comprehensive inspections, verify all systems, and ensure that every vehicle could operate reliably in challenging conditions. The timeline was aggressive, but manageable. "They'll be ready, Chief," Maya said simply. As Davis walked away, Maya began organizing her approach to the task ahead. Somewhere in hostile territory, Chief Ramirez and 11 other operators were either fighting for their lives or already beyond help. The vehicle she was about to prepare might be their only chance for rescue, assuming rescue was still possible. Maya gathered her tools and began the methodical process of preparing machines for a mission that could mean the difference between bringing the SEAL team home alive or confirming their worst fears. The weight of that responsibility settled on her shoulders as she worked, knowing that mechanical failure during a rescue operation could cost more lives than were already at risk. The rescue convoy departed at 0200 hours with 12 volunteers from various units across the base. Maya watched from the motor pool as the vehicle she had prepared disappeared into the darkness, their headlights cutting through the pre-dawn gloom like searchlights hunting for the lost. Chief Davis remained in the communications center, coordinating with the search team as they made their way toward the last known position of SEAL Team 7. The rescue operation faced the same communication challenges that had claimed the original team, with radio contact becoming increasingly sporadic as the convoy moved deeper into hostile territory. Maya returned to routine maintenance work, but concentration proved difficult. Every few minutes, she found herself glancing toward the radio room, watching for any sign that contact had been re-established with either the missing SEALs or their would-be rescuers. By noon, the rescue team had reached the target area and begun their search pattern. Their reports painted a grim picture of the operational environment. The terrain was more challenging than anticipated, with narrow mountain passes and dense vegetation that limited visibility and mobility. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez emerged from the communications center carrying an updated situation report. He found Lieutenant Commander Hayes reviewing tactical maps near the motor pool. "Sir, the rescue team has located the abandoned vehicles." Hayes looked up sharply. "Abandoned?" Rodriguez nodded grimly. Both Humvees were found approximately 3 kilometers from the original target. No signs of the team, but evidence suggests they came under heavy fire and were forced to abandon their transportation. Maya stopped working, her attention fully focused on the conversation unfolding nearby. The vehicle she had maintained so carefully were now empty shells in hostile territory, their occupants missing and presumed captured or worse. Hayes studied the map Rodriguez had brought. Any indication of where the team might have gone from there? Rodriguez pointed to several potential routes. The terrain forces movement along specific corridors. Our people think they moved northeast, but the trail is at least 20 hours old. Too much time has passed for effective tracking. The rescue team continued their search throughout the afternoon, but each report brought more frustration than progress. The mountainous terrain provided countless hiding places for both the missing SEALs and any hostile forces that might have captured them. Master Chief Peterson joined Hayes and Rodriguez as the situation reports grew increasingly pessimistic. "The rescue team is requesting additional assets," he said. "They need helicopters for aerial reconnaissance, and possibly extraction support. Hayes shook his head. Aviation assets are committed to other operations. The rescue team is on their own until tomorrow at the earliest. Maya found herself studying the tactical maps that had been spread across a workbench near her station. The geographic challenges were obvious even to someone without military training. The operational area was a maze of valleys and ridges that could conceal an army, let alone a 12-man SEAL team. As evening approached, the rescue operation faced its own communication problems. Radio contact with the search team became intermittent, then disappeared entirely as they moved deeper into the mountains pursuing leads that had yet to produce results. Chief Davis approached Maya's workspace, carrying yet another folder of maintenance requests. "Chun, I need you to prep additional vehicles. We might be sending reinforcements tomorrow." Maya looked up from the engine she was tuning. "How many vehicles, Chief?" Davis consulted his notes. "For more, plus spare parts and recovery equipment. If the rescue team gets into trouble, we'll need to mount a second operation to bring everyone home." Maya nodded, understanding the implications. The mission was spiraling into exactly the kind of situation that military planners worked desperately to avoid. One failed operation leading to another, with more personnel at risk and fewer options for success. As she began organizing the additional maintenance work, Maya found herself analyzing the tactical situation with skills that her official role didn't require. The operational area was remote and challenging, but not impossible to navigate for someone with the right training and equipment. The missing SEAL team had been captured or eliminated by hostile forces that clearly understood the terrain and had prepared for exactly this type of engagement. The rescue operation was proceeding according to standard protocols, but those protocols assumed certain capabilities and resources that might not be available in this situation. Maya worked through the night preparing vehicles for a reinforcement mission that might never come. The rescue team's continued radio silence suggested they were facing the same challenges that had claimed the original SEAL team. Each hour that passed reduced the probability that anyone would return from the mountains alive. Near dawn, Chief Davis returned with updated intelligence that confirmed everyone's worst fears. "We've lost contact with the rescue team," he said quietly. "Their last transmission was 8 hours ago." Maya stopped working and looked directly at Davis. 24 people? Davis nodded grimly. SEAL Team 7 plus the 12 volunteers who went after them. All missing in hostile territory, with no communication and no clear extraction plan. The weight of the situation settled over the base like a physical presence. What had begun as a routine mission had become a catastrophe that threatened to claim 24 highly trained personnel. Maya returned to her work, but her mind was already calculating alternatives that her official role prevented her from suggesting. Somewhere in those mountains, 24 men were depending on rescue operations that had already failed twice. The standard approach wasn't working, and time was running out for solutions that followed normal military protocol. The emergency briefing convened at 0800 hours with every senior officer on base in attendance. Maya could see them through the windows of the conference room, their faces grim as they discussed options that grew more limited with each passing hour. 24 men missing in hostile territory and no clear path forward. Lieutenant Commander Hayes emerged from the briefing carrying a thick folder of operational protocols. He walked directly to Master Chief Peterson, his expression reflecting the weight of impossible decisions. "We're looking at a complete mission failure," he said quietly. 2 teams down and no viable extraction options. Peterson crossed his arms. "What about air support? Helicopter insertion?" Hayes shook his head. "The operational area is too hot. Intelligence shows increased enemy activity throughout the region. Any aircraft we send in would be flying into a prepared ambush." Maya continued working on the vehicles that had been requested for the reinforcement mission, but every word of their conversation registered clearly. The tactical situation had deteriorated beyond standard rescue protocols, leaving conventional military responses inadequate for the challenge at hand. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez joined the discussion, carrying updated satellite imagery. "Sir, we've identified possible movement in the target area, but we can't confirm whether it's our people or hostile forces. Hayes studied the grainy photographs. How current is this intelligence? Rodriguez checked his notes. 4 hours old. The resolution isn't sufficient for positive identification, but the movement patterns suggest organized activity rather than random patrol. Maya found herself examining the satellite images over Rodriguez's shoulder, noting details that seemed significant. The movement patterns showed tactical discipline, with groups maintaining specific formations and intervals that suggested military training. Peterson pointed to several locations on the photographs. If that's our people, they're moving away from the extraction point. Either they're evading capture or they're being moved by hostile forces. Hayes nodded grimly. Either way, it complicates any rescue attempt. We'd be going in blind against an unknown number of enemies in terrain that favors the defenders. The conversation was interrupted by Captain Williams, who approached carrying a communication from higher headquarters. Sir, I've been ordered to inform you that no additional assets will be allocated to this operation. Command considers the risk too high for the potential return. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Maya could see the impact on the faces of everyone within earshot. 24 men were being written off because the tactical situation had become too challenging for conventional rescue operations. Hayes took the communication and read it carefully. So we're supposed to abandon them? Williams looked uncomfortable delivering the message. Command's position is that further rescue attempts would likely result in additional casualties without reasonable probability of success. Maya felt something cold and hard forming in her chest as she listened to the conversation. These men were discussing the abandonment of 24 operators as if it were a simple tactical calculation, weighing risks and benefits without considering alternatives that might exist outside normal military protocols. Peterson studied the tactical maps spread across a nearby table. What if we tried a smaller insertion team? 4 or 5 volunteers with specialized equipment. Hayes shook his head. The same problems apply. Limited extraction options, unknown enemy strength, and terrain that neutralizes most of our tactical advantages. Rodriguez pointed to possible approach routes on the map. A small team might be able to infiltrate without detection, but they'd still face the same challenges once they locate our people. Maya moved closer to the tactical display, studying the geographic features with increasing interest. The operational area was challenging, but not impossible for someone with the right combination of skills and equipment. The problem was that conventional military thinking focused on force protection and overwhelming firepower rather than stealth and precision. Chief Davis approached the group, carrying additional intelligence updates. Sir, we've received confirmation that hostile forces in the area have been reinforced significantly. Estimated strength is now between 60 and 80 combatants. Hayes looked at the numbers with visible frustration. 60 to 80 against whatever rescue force we could assemble. The math doesn't work in our favor. Maya continued studying the tactical situation, her mind automatically calculating approaches that her official role prevented her from suggesting. The enemy numbers were significant, but they were dispersed across a large area and probably not expecting a single-person infiltration. Williams consulted his watch. Command wanted a final decision within 2 hours. Either we mount a rescue operation with available assets, or we classify the personnel as missing in action and terminate active search efforts. The ultimatum sparked immediate discussion among the senior staff. Maya could hear fragments of conversation about acceptable risk levels, probability of success, and the political implications of losing 24 operators in a single engagement. Peterson voiced what everyone was thinking. A conventional rescue operation would require at least 40 personnel to have any chance of success. That means risking 40 lives to save 24, assuming they're still alive. Hayes nodded slowly. And if the rescue fails, we could lose 64 people instead of 24. Command's math is brutally logical. Maya felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her as she listened to the clinical discussion of acceptable losses. These officers were good men making impossible decisions within the constraints of their training and authority. But those constraints prevented them from considering solutions that fell outside normal military doctrine. As the 2-hour deadline approached, Maya realized that conventional rescue operations would indeed fail against the tactical situation they faced. The enemy had prepared for exactly this type of engagement, and standard military responses played directly into their strengths. But there were other options, approaches that didn't require overwhelming force or conventional tactics. Maya returned to her workbench, organizing tools and equipment, while her mind calculated possibilities that she couldn't voice without revealing far more about herself than her cover story allowed. The 2-hour deadline passed with no decision from the command staff. Maya watched through the conference room windows as heated discussions continued, voices raised in disagreement over impossible choices. Lieutenant Commander Hayes stood at the head of the table, his face reflecting the burden of leadership when every option led to unacceptable losses. Master Chief Peterson emerged from the meeting carrying a folder of contingency plans. He approached Chief Davis near the motor pool, speaking in low tones that Maya could barely hear above the sound of her tools. Commands leaning toward terminating the operation, Peterson said quietly. The risk assessment shows 90% probability of additional casualties with minimal chance of successful extraction. Davis shook his head. 24 good men, just written off because the math doesn't work. Peterson glanced around to ensure their conversation remained private. There might be one alternative. A volunteer mission off the books. Someone willing to go in alone with minimal support. Maya's hands paused in their work as she processed the implications. A solo infiltration mission would bypass many of the tactical challenges that made conventional rescue impossible, but it would require capabilities that most personnel simply didn't possess. Davis considered the suggestion. Who would volunteer for something like that? It's essentially a suicide mission. Peterson consulted his notes. We've got 3 volunteers already. Rodriguez, Martinez, and Stevens all put their names forward. Problem is, none of them have the specialized training for this type of operation. Maya found herself studying the tactical maps that remained spread across the nearby workbench. A single-person mission could work, but only if the operator possessed specific skills in infiltration, reconnaissance, and small unit tactics. The volunteers Peterson mentioned were good soldiers, but they lacked the specialized capabilities the mission would require. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez approached the 2 chiefs, his expression determined but grim. Chiefs, I want to formally request permission to attempt a solo extraction mission. I've studied the terrain and enemy positions, and I think one person might be able to get through where a larger force couldn't. Peterson looked at Rodriguez with obvious respect for his courage, but concern for his capabilities. Rodriguez, what's your experience with deep reconnaissance and solo operations? Rodriguez hesitated. Limited, Chief, but I'm willing to learn fast and take the risk. Davis shook his head. Willingness isn't enough for this type of mission. You'd need years of specialized training to have any chance of success. Maya continued working, but her attention was completely focused on the conversation developing nearby. These men were discussing exactly the type of operation she had been trained for, the kind of mission that required capabilities she possessed but couldn't reveal without compromising her carefully maintained cover. Lieutenant Commander Hayes joined the group, carrying updated intelligence reports. I've been reviewing our options one more time, he said. A solo mission is theoretically possible, but we don't have anyone with the necessary skill set. Peterson pointed to Rodriguez. We have volunteers, sir, but you're right about the skills gap. This would require someone with advanced reconnaissance training, combat experience in similar terrain, and the ability to operate independently for extended periods. Hayes nodded. Plus expertise in small unit tactics, enemy communications, and extraction procedures. It's a very specific combination of capabilities. Maya felt the weight of knowledge she couldn't share pressing down on her as she listened to the discussion. Every requirement they mentioned was something she had mastered during years of training that her official records couldn't reflect. But revealing that knowledge would destroy the carefully constructed identity that protected both her and her mission. Rodriguez studied the tactical maps with obvious frustration. What if I went in with minimal equipment? light and fast, avoiding engagement whenever possible. Hayes shook his head. Even with perfect execution, you need to locate 24 men in hostile territory, assess their condition, and coordinate extraction without being detected by 60 to 80 enemy combatants. The probability of success is essentially zero. Maya organized her tools with mechanical precision while her mind calculated approaches that the officers couldn't consider. The mission was challenging, but not impossible for someone with the right combination of training and experience. The key was understanding that success depended on stealth and precision rather than conventional military tactics. Chief Davis consulted his watch. Command want a final answer in 30 minutes. Either we authorize a volunteer mission with available personnel, or we officially terminate rescue operations. The ultimatum sparked immediate discussion among the group. Maya could hear the frustration in their voices as they wrestled with sending inadequately trained volunteers on a mission that would likely result in more casualties. Peterson voiced the obvious concern. If we send Rodriguez or Martinez, we're probably just adding to the body count. But doing nothing means abandoning 24 men to capture or execution. Hayes studied the satellite imagery one more time. There has to be someone on this base with the necessary qualifications. We're missing something. Maya felt the moment stretching toward a decision point that would determine whether 24 operators lived or died. The conventional military structure was failing because it couldn't adapt to a situation that required unconventional solutions. But those solutions existed if someone was willing to step outside the boundaries of normal protocol. As the 30-minute deadline approached, Maya realized that her carefully maintained cover was becoming a barrier to saving lives that mattered more than protecting her identity. The choice was becoming clear, even if the consequences would be irreversible. She continued working, organizing equipment and supplies while her mind made calculations that went far beyond mechanical repair. Somewhere in hostile territory, 24 men were running out of time, and conventional rescue operations had already failed twice. Maya looked toward the group of officers still debating impossible options, knowing that she possessed the capabilities they desperately needed but couldn't access through normal channels. The final deadline arrived with no viable solution in sight. Maya watched Lieutenant Commander Hayes return to the conference room to deliver the decision that would officially abandon 24 men to whatever fate awaited them in hostile territory. The weight of that choice was visible in his posture as he prepared to make the call that would end all rescue attempts. Maya set down her tools and walked toward the group of senior staff gathered near the tactical maps. Her movement was deliberate and purposeful, drawing surprised glances from officers who rarely noticed the quiet mechanic unless something was broken. "Sir," Maya said, addressing Hayes directly, "I'd like to volunteer for the solo extraction mission." The request created immediate silence among the gathered personnel. Hayes looked at her with obvious confusion, as if she had suggested something completely outside the realm of possibility. "Chun," Hayes said slowly, "we appreciate the sentiment, but this mission requires very specific qualifications that take years to develop." Maya met his gaze directly. "What qualifications specifically, sir?" Master Chief Peterson stepped forward, consulting his notes. "Advanced reconnaissance training, experience with solo operations in hostile territory, expertise in small unit tactics, and the ability to operate independently for extended periods without support." Maya nodded. "What else?" Peterson looked surprised by her calm response. "Combat experience against numerically superior forces, knowledge of enemy tactics and communication procedures, and specialized training in extraction operations." "I understand," Maya replied simply. Chief Davis moved closer to the conversation. "Chun, with all due respect, your file shows standard automotive training and 2 years of routine maintenance work. This mission is far beyond those qualifications." Maya felt the moment balanced on a knife's edge between maintaining her cover and revealing capabilities that could save lives. The careful identity she had constructed over months was about to crumble, but 24 men were depending on decisions that would be made in the next few minutes. "Sir," Maya said to Hayes, What if I told you that my actual qualifications were significantly different from what my file indicates? Hayes studied her face with growing interest. Different how? Maya took a breath, knowing that her next words would change everything. My real training includes advanced reconnaissance, solo operations, and direct action against enemy forces. I've completed missions similar to what you're describing. The statement created immediate skepticism among the officers present. Rodriguez crossed his arms and shook his head. Chun, that's a pretty convenient claim given the circumstances. What unit provided this supposed training? Maya looked directly at Rodriguez. I can't provide those details without compromising ongoing operations, but I can demonstrate my qualifications if you'll give me the opportunity. Peterson exchanged glances with Hayes before responding. Demonstrate how? Maya pointed to the satellite imagery spread across the workbench. I can analyze the tactical situation and provide specific infiltration routes, enemy positions, and extraction procedures. If my analysis proves accurate, then you'll know my qualifications are legitimate. Hayes considered the proposal carefully. The time pressure and lack of alternatives made even unlikely options worth exploring. All right, Chun, show us what you see. Maya moved to the tactical display and began pointing to specific features on the satellite photographs. The enemy positions follow a predictable pattern based on terrain advantages and communication requirements, she said. They've established observation posts here, and here, which creates gaps in coverage along these ridge lines. Peterson leaned in for a closer look. How can you be certain about enemy positions from satellite imagery? Maya traced potential movement routes with her finger. Standard defensive doctrine for this type of terrain. They're protecting the main approaches while maintaining communication between positions. But they're not expecting infiltration from these directions because the routes appear impassable. Hayes studied the routes Maya had identified. Those approaches would require advanced climbing skills and specialized equipment. Maya nodded, both of which I possess. The key is understanding that they're defending against conventional assault, not solo infiltration by someone with the right training and equipment. Chief Davis looked skeptical. Chun, even if you have the skills you claim, this is still an extremely dangerous mission with minimal chance of success. Maya continued her analysis, pointing to additional details on the photographs. The enemy communication pattern suggests they're using scheduled check-ins rather than continuous monitoring. That creates windows of opportunity for movement without detection. Rodriguez studied the tactical display with obvious surprise. How do you know their communication procedures? Maya met his gaze steadily. Experience with similar operations in comparable terrain. The patterns are consistent across different enemy organizations. Hayes consulted his watch, aware that time was running out for any decision at all. Chun, assuming your qualifications are legitimate, what would you need for this mission? Maya had already calculated the requirements down to the smallest detail. Minimal equipment load, specialized climbing gear, night vision capability, and extraction coordinates for helicopter pickup once the personnel are located. Peterson shook his head. You're talking about a one-person mission against 60 to 80 enemy combatants. Even with perfect execution, the odds are overwhelmingly against success. Maya looked around the group of officers, seeing the doubt and concern in their faces. They were good men trying to make impossible decisions within the constraints of their training and experience. But those constraints prevented them from recognizing capabilities that existed outside normal military channels. Sir, Maya said to Hayes, 24 men are going to die if we don't try something different. I'm telling you that I have the training and experience to make this mission work. The question is whether you're willing to authorize it. Hayes studied her face, looking for any sign of uncertainty or false bravado. What he saw was calm confidence backed by knowledge that couldn't be easily faked. The mechanic who had worked quietly in the motor pool for 6 months was revealing capabilities that transformed everything they thought they knew about her. Lieutenant Commander Hayes made the decision that would either save 24 lives or add one more to the casualty list. Authorization granted. Chun, you have 12 hours to prove your capabilities or extract what personnel you can locate. Maya nodded, already transitioning from mechanic to operator as she began calculating equipment requirements and mission timelines. The change in her demeanor was immediate and striking, drawing surprised glances from officers who had never seen anything beyond quiet competence from the woman they thought they knew. Chief Davis approached with obvious concern. "Chun, I need to ask one more time. Are you absolutely certain about this? Once you're in that terrain, there's no backup and no extraction if things go wrong." Maya met his gaze with steady confidence. "I'm certain, Chief, but I'll need specific equipment that isn't standard issue for mechanics." Hayes consulted his watch. "What do you need, and how quickly can we get it?" Maya handed him a list she had prepared while they debated her qualifications. Tactical gear, specialized climbing equipment, night vision systems, and communication devices with extended range capability. Peterson examined the list with growing surprise. "This is operator-level equipment. How do you know exactly what you need?" Maya began changing from her coveralls into the tactical clothing that would replace her mechanic's uniform. "Because I've used it before in similar situations. The equipment requirements are determined by the mission profile, not personal preference." As Maya transformed her appearance from maintenance worker to combat operator, the officers present began to understand that they had fundamentally misjudged the woman who had worked among them for 6 months. Her movements became precise and economical, every action serving a specific tactical purpose. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez watched the transformation with obvious amazement. "Chin, where exactly did you receive this training? Your file doesn't show any specialized military education." Maya adjusted the night vision equipment and checked the communication systems. "Some training doesn't appear in standard files, Rodriguez. What matters now is whether I can bring those men home alive." The equipment fitting process revealed capabilities that couldn't be faked or learned from manuals. Maya handled advanced tactical gear with the familiarity of someone who had used it extensively under combat conditions. Her knowledge of proper adjustment and employment was immediate and precise. Hayes observed her preparations with growing confidence. "Chun, assuming you locate the missing personnel, what's your extraction plan?" Maya consulted the tactical maps one final time. "I'll establish communication once I've confirmed their status and location. Helicopter extraction from predetermined coordinates, with ground support if needed for wounded personnel." Chief Davis checked his watch. "Sunset in 4 hours. You'll be moving in darkness through terrain that's already claimed 2 rescue attempts." Maya secured her equipment and verified that all systems function properly. Darkness is an advantage for this type of operation. The enemy positions are designed to counter daylight assault, not night infiltration. Master Chief Peterson approached with final intelligence updates. "Chun, latest satellite imagery shows continued movement in the target area. You could be walking into active combat operations." Maya studied the new photographs with practiced efficiency, noting details that revealed enemy deployment patterns and tactical intentions. The movement suggests they're consolidating positions rather than actively pursuing our people. That's actually good news for extraction purposes. Hayes made final notes on the mission authorization documents. "Chun, I want communication checks every 4 hours once you're in position. If we don't hear from you by dawn, we'll assume the mission has failed." Maya nodded, understanding the implications. The timeline was aggressive, but manageable if everything proceeded according to plan. She had operated under similar constraints before, though never with so many lives depending on successful completion. Rodriguez shook his head with obvious admiration and concern. 6 months ago, if someone had told me our base mechanic was planning a solo rescue mission against 60 enemy combatants, I would have recommended psychological evaluation. Maya adjusted her equipment one final time and checked the tactical radio that would be her only link to base once the mission began. 6 months ago, that would have been the appropriate response. Circumstances change requirements. As the sun began to set over Coronado Naval Base, Maya prepared to depart on a mission that would either validate her hidden capabilities or confirm the skeptics who had questioned her qualifications. The woman who had spent months rebuilding engines and adjusting brake systems was about to attempt something that trained special operations personnel had already failed to accomplish. Chief Davis watched her final preparations with obvious conflict between hope and realistic assessment of the odds. Chun, bring them home. All of them. Maya looked toward the mountains where 24 men waited for rescue that might never come through conventional channels. They're coming home, Chief, one way or another. The helicopter that would insert her near the operational area was already spinning up on the landing pad, its rotors cutting through the evening air with mechanical precision. Maya walked toward the aircraft with the confident stride of someone who had done this before, leaving behind the quiet mechanic identity that had concealed her true capabilities for 6 months. Lieutenant Commander Hayes watched her departure with the growing realization that his base had been home to an operator whose qualifications exceeded anything in her official file. The woman climbing into the helicopter was not the person they thought they had known, and that transformation carried implications that extended far beyond the current mission. The radio crackled to life at 0300 hours with a transmission that changed everything the base personnel thought they understood about their quiet mechanic. Maya's voice came through clearly despite the distance and hostile terrain separating her from Coronado. Base, this is Chun. I have eyes on 24 friendly personnel, all alive, currently held in a compound approximately 2 kilometers from their last known position. Lieutenant Commander Hayes nearly dropped his coffee cup as he processed the information. Chun, confirm your status. Are you saying you've located both teams? Confirmed, Maya replied calmly. SEAL Team 7 and the rescue team are being held in separate buildings within the same compound. Guard force approximately 40 hostiles with standard small arms. Master Chief Peterson leaned over the radio operator's shoulder. How did you get close enough for visual confirmation without being detected? Maya's response carried the matter-of-fact tone of someone reporting routine information. Standard infiltration procedures. The enemy positions follow predictable patterns that create gaps in their observation coverage. Chief Davis exchanged glances with Hayes, both men struggling to reconcile the competent mechanic they knew with the operator conducting reconnaissance deep in hostile territory. The radio crackled again with Maya's voice. Beginning elimination of perimeter guards. Request helicopter standby for extraction in approximately 2 hours. Peterson grabbed the microphone. Chun, did you say elimination? You're talking about engaging 40 hostiles as a single operator. Affirmative, Maya replied. The tactical situation requires reducing enemy numbers before extraction becomes viable. Moving to execute. Hayes felt his understanding of reality shifting as he processed what he was hearing. Their base mechanic was calmly discussing a direct assault against odds that would challenge an entire platoon of trained operators. For the next 90 minutes, periodic updates painted a picture that seemed impossible to believe. Maya's voice remained steady and professional as she reported the systematic reduction of enemy forces guarding the compound where their people were held. Enemy count reduced to 28, she reported after the first 30 minutes. Perimeter security neutralized. Moving to inner positions. Rodriguez stood behind the radio operator, shaking his head in amazement. She's taking them apart piece by piece. How is this possible? Davis consulted the tactical map, trying to visualize the operation Maya was conducting alone in hostile territory. She's using techniques that aren't taught in standard military training. This is specialist-level capability. The updates continued with methodical precision. Enemy count now 18. Communications disrupted. Preparing to breach compound. Hayes found himself holding his breath as he waited for each transmission. The woman they had dismissed as just a mechanic was conducting a solo assault that would have challenged a full special operations team. Compound secured. Maya reported exactly 2 hours after her initial contact. All friendly personnel accounted for. Some wounded but mobile. Ready for extraction. Peterson immediately activated the helicopter crew that had been standing by. Extraction bird is airborne. ETA to your position, 12 minutes. Copy that, Maya replied, marking landing zone with infrared strobe. Enemy forces in the area have been neutralized. Hayes stared at the radio equipment as if it might provide an explanation for what he had just heard. Neutralized. She had eliminated 60 enemy combatants as a single operator and rescued two teams that conventional forces had failed to reach. The helicopter pilot's voice came through on a different frequency. "Base, this is Extraction Bird. I have visual on the landing zone. There are bodies everywhere down here." Davis leaned forward. "Define everywhere, pilot." Pilot responded with obvious amazement. "Sir, I count at least 50 enemy casualties scattered around this compound. Whoever did this work knew exactly what they were doing." Maya's voice returned to the primary frequency. "All personnel loaded and secure. Extraction complete. Returning to base." The helicopter carrying Maya and 24 rescued operators touched down at Coronado 40 minutes later. Hayes, Peterson, and Davis waited on the landing pad as the aircraft disgorged personnel they had given up for dead. Chief Ramirez was the first to emerge, supporting a wounded team member but moving under his own power. His face showed exhaustion and relief, but also something else that Hayes couldn't immediately identify. Rodriguez approached Ramirez as the SEAL team leader reached the edge of the landing pad. "Chief, what happened out there? How did you manage to locate and extract both teams?" Ramirez looked toward Maya, who was conducting a brief medical assessment of the wounded personnel. "Sir, I don't know who Chin really is, but she's not just a mechanic. What she did tonight, that was operator-level work. Elite-level work." Hayes watched Maya as she efficiently coordinated medical care for the wounded and debriefed the rescued personnel. Her movements were precise and confident, displaying capabilities that transformed everything they thought they knew about the woman who had worked quietly among them for 6 months. Peterson approached Maya directly. "Chun, we need to debrief this operation. What you accomplished tonight shouldn't have been possible for a single operator against those odds." Maya looked up from the wounded Marine she was treating. "The tactical situation required unconventional solutions, Master Chief. Sometimes the impossible becomes necessary." Davis studied her face, looking for any explanation that might reconcile the mechanic they knew with the operator who had just rescued 24 men from certain death. "Chin, who are you really?" Maya met his gaze steadily. "I'm whoever the mission requires me to be, Chief. Tonight, the mission required someone with specific capabilities." The rescued personnel continued to emerge from the helicopter, each man alive, because of actions that challenged every assumption the base leadership had made about their quiet mechanic. Maya had proven her capabilities in the most definitive way possible, but the proof raised more questions than it answered about who she really was and why she had been hiding her true qualifications. The debriefing session convened at dawn, with every senior officer on base in attendance. Maya sat at the head of the conference table, no longer the invisible mechanic, but an operator whose capabilities had fundamentally altered the power dynamics on Coronado Naval Base. The transformation was complete and irreversible. Lieutenant Commander Hayes opened the session with obvious difficulty, reconciling what he had witnessed with everything he thought he knew. "Chun, last night you accomplished something that military doctrine says should be impossible. We need to understand how and why." Maya met his gaze with the same calm confidence she had displayed throughout the mission. "The tactical situation required eliminating approximately 60 hostiles while extracting 24 friendly personnel from a fortified position. I had the training and equipment necessary to complete the mission." Master Chief Peterson consulted his notes from the night's radio transmissions. "You engaged and eliminated 60 enemy combatants as a single operator. That level of capability suggests training and experience far beyond what your official file indicates." Maya nodded. "My actual qualifications are classified at levels above your clearance, Master Chief. What matters is that 24 men are alive who would otherwise be dead." Chief Ramirez, whose SEAL team had been the original target of the rescue mission, looked directly at Maya. "Ma'am, with respect, what you did last night saved our lives. But my team and I have some questions about who you really are." Maya turned to address Ramirez directly. "What questions, Chief?" Ramirez leaned forward. "Your movement techniques, weapon handling, and tactical decision-making show training that takes years to develop. You operated in hostile territory with efficiency that exceeds most special operations personnel I've worked with." Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, who had volunteered for the mission Maya ultimately completed, shook his head in amazement. 6 months ago, I thought you were just another mechanic who happened to be good with engines. Now I'm wondering if there's anyone on this base who actually knows who you are. Maya considered her response carefully. My cover assignment required maintaining a low profile while stationed at Coronado. The mission parameters changed when 24 lives became at risk. Hayes studied the classified folder that had arrived via courier earlier that morning. Chun, I've received confirmation from higher headquarters about your actual status and qualifications. The details are above my clearance level, but the authentication is legitimate. Chief Davis, who had supervised Maya's work in the motor pool for 6 months, looked at her with obvious conflict between admiration and confusion. Chun, you spent half a year changing oil and rebuilding transmissions. Why maintain a cover assignment that underutilized your actual capabilities? Maya met his gaze steadily. Cover assignments serve specific purposes, Chief. Sometimes the most effective operators are the ones no one suspects of having advanced capabilities. Peterson consulted additional documentation that had arrived with the morning's intelligence briefings. According to these reports, your actual military occupational specialty is classified, but your training includes advanced reconnaissance, direct action, and solo operations in hostile territory. The information confirmed what everyone in the room had already concluded based on the previous night's mission results. Maya possessed capabilities that exceeded anything they had imagined possible for someone with her apparent background and experience. Rodriguez voiced what several others were thinking. So for 6 months, we had an elite operator working as a mechanic, and none of us recognized what we were looking at. Maya returned to organizing maintenance schedules that would no longer define her primary duties on base. Recognition wasn't the objective, Rodriguez. Successful mission completion was the objective. Hayes consulted his watch, aware that the morning's revelations would require significant adjustments to base operations and personnel assignments. Chun, effective immediately, you're reassigned to duties that better match your actual qualifications. Maya looked up from the paperwork she had been reviewing. What duties specifically, sir? Hayes smiled for the first time since the crisis began. Whatever duties you determine are necessary to keep this base and its personnel mission ready. Your cover assignment is officially terminated. The change in status was immediate and dramatic. Maya was no longer the quiet mechanic who worked invisibly in the motor pool. She had become a recognized expert whose capabilities commanded respect from every person on the base. Chief Davis approached her as the debriefing session concluded. Chun, I owe you an apology. We all do. You saved 24 lives while we were still debating whether rescue was even possible. Maya packed her remaining tools from the motor pool workspace she would no longer occupy. No apology necessary, Chief. You made decisions based on the information available to you. As word of the previous night's mission spread throughout the base, Maya found herself receiving acknowledgement from personnel who had previously dismissed her as just another support worker. The transformation was complete, but it carried implications that extended far beyond her individual situation. Speaking of transformations, I'm curious about something as we wrap up this story. Have you ever witnessed a moment where someone completely shattered expectations and proved they were capable of far more than anyone realized? Maybe in your own workplace, community, or even your own life. I'd love to hear about it in the comments, because these moments of revelation happen more often than we think, and they're always incredible to witness. Drop a comment and share your own story of someone who turned out to be so much more than they appeared. The motor pool felt different without Maya's constant presence, but her legacy remained in the perfectly maintained vehicles and the memory of capabilities that had saved lives when conventional solutions failed. She had proven that sometimes the most extraordinary people are hidden in the most ordinary places, waiting for the moment when circumstances demand they reveal who they really are. Maya's story at Coronado Naval Base had begun with dismissal and underestimation. It concluded with recognition and respect earned through actions that spoke louder than any credentials or official documentation ever could. The quiet mechanic had become a legend, and everyone who witnessed her transformation understood that they had learned something important about the danger of judging people based on appearances rather than capabilities.